Hey guys, what's going on? It's good to see you. Today's topic will be ideas. Part 1 of a 3-part series on what makes a great story. I'm Tony Genovese, better known as Gary Oak, and this is a piece of the Literature Pie. So I apologize for having such a vague sounding title, but I feel it'll make sense once we've moved a little bit further along in the video. So this series is meant to, as you would guess, sort of outline vaguely what you need to write a great story. This isn't a guide or anything, it's just the 3 key elements that I feel go into it. It's kind of like assembling the Triforce in Legend of Zelda. If you assemble the whole Triforce, you become all-powerful. Basically like that, except in the literary world, if you'll take that crazy extended metaphor for what it is. Anyway, the story that I want to discuss today is going to be one that's very familiar with everybody watching. I'm pretty sure everyone watching has either read the story, which is most likely the case, or at least heard of it, or at least knows the gist of this story. It's going to be a bit of an oldie, and one of the most prominent stories within the fandom. And that story is Past Sins. Why Past Sins? As I said, it's a very prominent story. I'm going to be spoiling quite a lot of Past Sins, so make sure that you have read it or you do not care about spoilers, because throughout this whole series I am going to be spoilering it. The only text of Past Sins I'm going to be looking over is going to be the body text of part of the prologue, and that's going to be in the 3rd part of the series. But since we're talking about ideas, I'm actually going to be going over quite a lot of the meat and potatoes of the series, as it were. So, ideas. Past Sins ideas are amazing. Let's just look at what it says for the description. On a dark night filled with even darker magics, an insane cult attempts to give Nightmare Moon a body and life of her own, utterly separate from Princess Luna. But, when the spell is interrupted by Celestia, something unexpected is created. Now, a little black alicorn filly named Nyx finds herself living under the care of Twilight Sparkle, only to be haunted by memories and emotions from her past. Is she Nightmare Moon reborn, or is she simply a doppelganger with a soul and mind of her own? Can Twilight Sparkle protect Nyx from those who refuse to see past her dragon eyes and black coat? Or will Nyx be forced to inherit the sins that may not even be hers, and become the greatest evil Equestria has ever known? That is a pretty awesome premise, and that's just the premise of Past Sins. Looking at it more broadly, with spoilers of course, basically the shrapnel or the armor scraps from Nightmare Moon herself when the elements blasted her into oblivion, remaining they're just there. If you remember episode 2 at the very end, they're just kind of sitting there, and Luna kind of steps out of the husk, as it were. So what Penstroke had happen is Celestia sent the head of her school, I believe his name is Spell Nexus, to go and gather the armor scraps and then study them. Unfortunately, the armor scraps were still possessed by that sort of miasma thing that made Luna into Nightmare Moon and possessed him. And then from there it spread like an infection throughout the Canterlot hierarchy and created this cult of Nightmare, which was basically the massive red herring for what who the true villain was. And this whole scheme was devised by the miasma so it could take over the world, which I guess was its motivation. The miasma never really speaks or anything. The only time we really see it is when Nyx ends up destroying it, which was a pretty cool scene. So that is just a really cool idea. Even if you only hear a little bit of that, you're like, wow, I really want to read that. And that's just part of it. There are a bunch of other things, like, for example, the underground fortress, and then the alicorns fighting with magic weapons. The whole magic weapons thing, I can attest to that being a good idea, as I had the exact same idea myself when I wrote my novel. I use that a lot, and to a greater extent than Penstroke, and I actually thought of it independently of Past Sins, because I'd never read Past Sins, and I had made sure to avoid any and all spoilers regarding it, just so I didn't end up stealing ideas from it when I wrote my book. And what do you know, I ended up coming up with the exact same thing Penstroke did, so there's that there. A little bit of shameless self-promotion. And then there's the whole idea of the Twilight Nyx mother-daughter relationship, and then the whole Nyx CMC relationship, and how, Nyx being a filly, has to be, like, she's in disguise, she goes to school, and she ends up making friends and enemies, and basically acts just like another kid, which helps us become attached to the character. And then of course I really like I think it was a collar that was put around the unicorns so they couldn't use magic when they were in prison. Like, for example, that's what Spell Nexus did to Twilight when she was in the dungeon in the castle. So I think all these ideas are really amazing for the most part. And if you can just keep going through Past Sins and just keep seeing all these really great ideas, just one after another, pop up over and over and over, especially considering this is a 2011 story written at the very end of Season 1. So this is back when there was, like, Equestria was tiny back in Season 1 compared to what we have now and as we progress through Season 4. I mean, there really wasn't too much canon to go off. Most of it was just slice-of-life episodes building on the characters, and there was very little world building. And that didn't really start happening, I think, until, just recently. There was a bit of it in Season 2, but it didn't really the ball really didn't get rolling. Either way, the point I'm trying to make is Past Sins was completed before any of this large-scale world building and lore was injected into the series. So you've got to take that into account when you compare, Past Sins with something more contemporary, even though Past Sins technically is contemporary, but by the Pony fanfic timeline, it's ancient, which is kind of funny when you're talking about a book that's only about just coming up on 3 years old. Now we've seen the effectiveness of ideas, because just think about all the stories that aren't Past Sins that you really like. For example, Harry Potter. This boy in this horrible situation, he's this orphan, and nothing's going right for him. Then suddenly he finds out he is the chosen one of a secret wizarding world and learns all about magic. That's a really cool concept. Then the whole concept of, Voldemort and all the Horcruxes and da-da-da-da-da, I could go on for days about that, but I won't. Again, that's an amazing idea. Now let's look at Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a combination of two ideas. Apparently George R. R. Martin has gone on record saying that he took Sopranos and Lord of the Rings, put them together, and create a Game of Thrones out of it. So you can see, even ideas don't just come from nothing. They originate from something else, but they are spun to such a degree by the writer that they become their own ideas. Because nothing, as I said, nothing just comes out of thin air. It's kind of it almost follows a retention of mass theory. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It's kind of like that with ideas. You just form complicated compounds, and since there's a lot more ideas than there are elements on the periodic table, that's why we have such a diverse entity that is literature. So how can we apply this to our own work? Well, we have to start getting ideas, first of all. And then we have to start refining them and making sure they're good ideas and not just, what if we did this and it's something done really, over and over again. Like, for example, say you have an idea that's basically the plot to the Terminator. It's like, yay, this is a good idea. Oh, wait, that's just the Terminator. Damn. So you've got to start getting ideas. And how do you get ideas? We can get them by consuming all types of different media, not just books, but films. And another way to do that is to travel. Just expose yourself to as much stuff as possible. There's no such thing as useless information to a writer. Some of the best characters are sort of caricatures or fusions of people in the writer's life. And real life is often less believable than fiction. I've written stuff that's basically copy and pasted from my life in some of my stories, and people said, I don't find this believable. I think you just went too far and it was too contrived. I'm like, no, that's actually someone who really exists and how they really talk. Or this really happened. And that's happened multiple times in college, where this one woman wrote about, what was it? She was writing a story about these people with, I know one of the characters dies of cancer in the end. It's pretty sad, but I remember they were visiting their grandmother in this hospital, and the part that just stuck with me the most out of that whole story, it was just a funny thing that was brought up in the in-class workshop quite a bit, was the grandmother who was hospitalized unleashed this mighty fart that actually shook the windows or rattled the windows, and everyone's like, oh, this isn't believable. And then when I was talking to the woman after, she's like, yeah, long ago, I was one of those, in that scene, I was one of those little girls, and that actually happened, and it was like the most hilarious thing ever. So that's how some of these unique ideas happen. Just remember interesting things. As I said, there's no such thing as useless information. I mean, for most people, that little anecdote I just told, that's useless. But to a writer, that's resources. That's the ore that you mine. A guy I met in school the other day actually said, I play D&D all the time. And because of that, that's how I get ideas. And that guy is apparently a goldmine for ideas. So I've never played D&D myself, but apparently I should, because that's how you keep your brain active in creating ideas. The hardest part is getting the ideas stimulated. I think ideas are the part that I'm weakest in out of all three of these elements. So I have to work on this a lot myself, because a lot of the time it's like, I can write stories. I know how to write very well. I'm quite well trained and I can write quite crisply, but it's just coming up with something interesting enough to write about that's the challenge. For example, this semester, I was given the opportunity to hop into a 4th-year television writing course if I was willing to stay in my 3rd-year stage play writing course to actually write a stage play. But I don't have any ideas for a stage play. I just don't have anything in mind that I think would make a good full-length stage play. So I just said, well, I'm just going to write a TV script for this 3rd-year stage writing course and kind of go all over the place, because the script's a script, and the prof said it was fine if you don't write a stage play in particular. So, yeah, ideas, man, they're tough to come by. Stephen King says, read a lot, write a lot. Reading a lot, it definitely helps you get good ideas. Just read stuff and force yourself to consume things that you normally wouldn't. Watch good movies, be them, say if you're a fantasy guy, start watching some romance or whatever. Just watch something that's completely out of your comfort zone. That's what I've been trying to do, and that's what college is forcing me to do. In my genre fiction class, I have a reading package about this thick, and I've read, I don't know, like maybe 5% of what's in there. There's all tons of stuff in there, from like Game of Thrones, The Hobbit, Lovecraft, Agatha Christie. They're just stuff all over the place. So I'm going to get a really good workout when it comes to that. Oh, Pamela is a story in there. So, again, just consume things and keep thinking about it. Now, how do you retain ideas? This is a bit of a controversial topic, and it may or may not be for you. Try using notebooks and laptops. I really like those. If you have an idea, just write it down in a notebook, or write it down on, type it out on your laptop or whatever. Always have one or the other, or preferably both, around you at all times, so you're always able to record your ideas. Now, Stephen King is vehemently opposed to notebooks, saying that all they do is immortalize bad ideas. And some writers actually agree with this, but some people find them invaluable. The hard part of having a notebook is you really have to know what ideas you should hold on to and what ideas should be either amended or thrown away. Because remember, we as human beings, we get ideas, even if we struggle to come up with them. And I'd say the vast majority of the ideas are quite terrible and wouldn't do very well for stories. So you really have to pan for gold there. It's a difficult thing to do, and my friend said that, your first 10 to 20 stories are probably going to suck. And that's just how it is. You just have to write a lot of bad material before you can write a lot of good material. So just keep at it. That's, I guess, what you can take away from it. Writing is an art like all arts. So you just have to put in your time, put in your 10,000 hours, work as hard as you can, and just keep going. You're always going to improve. One way to motivate yourself is to look at what you have written originally and then what you're writing now, and you're going to be amazed by the difference. I look at stuff I've written 6 months back, and I'm just like, wow, how could I have been such a terrible writer? And I've been able to do this since I started writing in September of 2011. So it's a process. It's an incremental process. So Just do what you can, figure out how to get creative juices flowing. Some people go out for walks, some people listen to music. There is no patented way of succeeding. You just have to try as many different things as you can, and once you find a way that works for you, keep doing it. And in my opinion, ideas are the most important and the most difficult part of writing, because pretty much everything else can be learned by, it's more scientific. This part is the least scientific part of writing. It's what makes writing alive. So you need to be able to breathe life into your writing. Anyway, I really hope that helps you guys, and next time we're going to be talking about part 2, which is execution. Great, you've got all these amazing ideas. What are you going to do with them? How do you put them on paper? This is probably the second most difficult part of writing and the second most important part. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, guys. My name has been Gary Oak, and I'll see you next time.